All right, so today we're going to be diving into something I think is pretty cool. Um, it's this idea of using this thing called modern portfolio theory to choose the best projects, to
Mhm.
actually, make your organization's strategy happen. It's like, how do you take these brilliant financial ideas and apply them to the real world?
Yeah, it's a fascinating challenge. And luckily, you've provided us with some great sources to work with. We've got excerpts from Markovitz's own book, Portfolio Selection. That's where he really lays out all the theory. Plus, we've got sections from the Standard for Portfolio Management, which gives us a more practical framework. So, really helpful.
Yeah, totally agree. To set the stage a bit, we're going to be looking at how to think about risk across different types of projects, how to balance those quick wins with the initiatives that are more long-term, and how to make sure your project portfolio isn't just about squeezing out every bit of efficiency, but also leaves room for innovation.
Yeah, finding that balance is key. That's where portfolio management goes from just checking boxes to really driving strategic change.
Okay, so let's jump right in with Markovitz. And this thing that he calls the uncertainty principle. Now, I know what you're thinking. Are we talking quantum physics here? Don't worry, we're not going that deep.
Right. In this context, it's about the uncertainty of investment returns. And Markovitz really emphasizes this quite a bit. He points out just how unpredictable things are. President's health, the weather inventions, you name it. All of these can impact your returns.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean,
So,
even Coca-Cola stock. You would think that would be like a pretty safe bet. Had some pretty wild ups and downs between like 1937 and 1954, according to Markovitz.
yeah, he uses that Coca-Cola example quite a bit. But
Yeah.
here's where it gets really interesting. And this is where he really challenged conventional wisdom. Because back then, the idea was to pick only the best stocks. And Markovitz said, hold on. What if, instead of trying to predict which single stock will perform the best, we think about how stocks move together?
So instead of putting all our eggs in one basket, we're spreading them out, but in a strategic way. I'm starting to see how this connects to project portfolios.
Exactly. And he showed that by combining different assets, in his case, stocks in the stock, you could actually create a portfolio that was less risky than any single stock on its own. And he called this diversification.
Okay, but how diversified do we need to be? If I have 10 projects, should I have 10 completely different areas? Help us unpack this diversification a bit more.
Well, this is where the math comes in. And Markovitz got pretty deep into it. He used something called standard deviation to measure risk. Imagine you're plotting all the possible outcomes of a project on a graph. Standard deviation tells you how spread out those outcomes are. A wide spread means high volatility, and narrow spread things are more predictable.
So a project with a high standard deviation is like that friend that's always up for anything. Could be
Yeah.
amazing, could be a total disaster. There's no in between.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And Markovitch showed that by combining assets that aren't all moving in the same direction, what we call uncorrelated assets, you can actually reduce the overall standard deviation of the portfolio. It's like smoothing out the bumps in the road.
Okay, I'm following so far. Less risky portfolio, combining things that aren't totally dependent on each other. But hold on. The standard for portfolio management cautions against just cramming in as many projects as possible.
Yeah.
It's not just about quantity.
You're absolutely right. They really emphasize balancing capacity, what you can actually handle right now, with capability, which is your potential, to take on bigger and bolder things in the future.
So it's like I could try to juggle 10 balls at once, but I'm probably going to drop all of them. Better to start with a few and then build up my skills.
Exactly. It's about being strategic with what you take on and making sure your portfolio reflects your long-term vision, not just what you can squeeze in today.
Which brings us to this idea of short-term versus long-term, right? We don't want to be so focused on putting out fires
Yeah.
that we forget to build for the future.
Right. And that's where this whole idea of efficient portfolios and different project horizons comes in. So an efficient portfolio is that sweet spot where you're getting the maximum return for the level of risk that you're comfortable with. Think of it like choosing between different paths to reach your destination. Some might be shorter but bumpier, others longer but smoother.
So an efficient portfolio has the right mix of those paths. We're not just picking the shortest one every time.
Exactly. And when we talk about project horizons, we're talking about aligning projects with different time frames for delivering value. The standard for portfolio management outlines three horizons. Horizon 1 projects are your quick wins, things that deliver value in the short term, often lower risk because they're based on what you already know how to do well.
Okay, so Horizon 1 is about making things more efficient or effective now.
Yeah.
Got it. What about Horizons 2 and 3?
Horizon 2 projects are about building the capabilities for the midterm. These are a bit riskier because you're pushing into new territory, but they're essential for staying competitive and relevant as the world changes. And then there's Horizon 3, your moonshots. These are the innovative, potentially game-changing projects. They're high risk, but they have the potential for huge rewards in the long run.
So it's like Horizon 1 is keeping the lights on, Horizon 2 is about building a better house, and Horizon 3 is about, I don't know, inventing a flying house.
That's a great way to put it. And the standard for portfolio management really emphasizes capacity planning here. You need to make sure you're not so bogged down with those Horizon 1 projects that you can't invest in your future.
So finding that balance between those different horizons is key. But how do we decide how much to invest in each one? Is there like a magic formula?
There's no magic formula, unfortunately. It depends on your organization's specific goals, its risk tolerance, and how much it can realistically handle. The key is to approach it strategically and make sure your portfolio reflects your long-term vision for where you want to be.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense. We've gone from just a pile of projects to a way to actually align them with strategy and think about risk over time. But I have a feeling there's more to it than just the numbers, right? We're dealing with people, with teams. There's a whole human element that we need to consider.
You're absolutely right. And that's something that we'll dig into further in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So in the last part, we talked about Markovitz's uncertainty principle, this idea of diversification, and how to kind of balance risk and reward across those different project horizons, the quick wins, the capability builders, and then the moonshots. But now let's get down to like the brass tacks. How do we actually put this into practice?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, or in this case, the multi-million-dollar question when we're talking about project portfolios. But luckily, the standard for portfolio management gives us some really concrete guidance here.
So where do we start? If I'm sitting here with a list of potential projects, what's the first step in building this dream portfolio that's actually going to move the needle for my organization?
Well, all starts with understanding your organization's strategic objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Where do you want to be in 5, 10, even 20 years? What are the big, hairy, audacious goals that are going to get you there?
Right. You need to have like a destination in mind.
Yeah.
Before you start packing your bags for this journey, no point in picking random projects if they're not taking you where you want to go.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of a portfolio roadmap comes in. It's a high-level plan that outlines the major initiatives that you'll be undertaking to reach those strategic objectives. It's like having a GPS for your portfolio.
Okay, I like that analogy. But a GPS kind of implies like a pretty fixed route, right? What if we hit a detour or we discover a cool scenic overlook we want to check out along the way? How do we balance that structure with the need for flexibility in our portfolio?
That's a great question. And it highlights why a good roadmap is a living document. It evolves as your organization learns and grows, as the market shifts, as new technologies emerge. But it provides that essential structure, that guiding framework for making decisions about which projects to pursue.
Okay, so we've got our roadmap, we've got our GPS. Now we need to start choosing which projects to like pack in our car for this journey. How do we go about actually selecting the best ones?
Well, that's where the real fun begins. We need to assess potential projects based on a number of criteria. And this is where Markovitz's ideas about risk and return come into play.
So we're not just looking at if a project is a good idea in a vacuum. We're also looking at its potential impact on our strategic objectives.
Yeah.
Its timeline, its cost, its risk profile. All of these things need to be factored in.
Exactly. The standard for portfolio management actually talks about using a scoring model to evaluate projects. You assign weights to different criteria based on their importance to your organization's strategy.
So if innovation is a top priority for my organization, I might give more weight to projects that push boundaries and explore new possibilities, even if they're a bit riskier. But if, say, cost reduction is a major concern, maybe I'll weight that more heavily in my evaluation.
Exactly, you're getting it. But remember, we also need to balance that with criteria like feasibility. Can we actually pull this off? Do we have the resources, the expertise? And then there's alignment. Does this project make sense in the context of all the other projects in our portfolio?
Right. Because even the most brilliant, innovative idea is useless if you don't have the people, the budget, or the time to execute it. We don't want to end up with a bunch of stalled or failed projects because we overcommitted.
Absolutely. A well-managed portfolio is one that delivers on its promises. And that means making tough choices. Sometimes the best decision is to say no to a project, even if it sounds exciting on paper.
Yeah, saying no is definitely the hardest part, but better to be realistic about your capacity than to spread yourself too thin and end up with a bunch of half-baked initiatives.
Okay, so we've evaluated potential projects, we've considered our capacity, we've made some difficult decisions. What happens next? How do we make sure that this portfolio actually succeeds?
Well, that's where governance comes in. It's all about having clear processes, roles, and responsibilities for managing the portfolio throughout its life cycle.
So it's not enough to just like pick the right projects and wave a magic wand. We also need to make sure they're executed well, that they stay aligned with our strategy, that we're monitoring progress and managing risks along the way.
You got it. It's like building a house. You need the right blueprint, the right materials, but you also need a skilled construction crew and a site manager who keeps everything running smoothly. And in the world of portfolio management, the Portfolio Management Office, or PMO, plays a critical role.
Okay, I've heard that term PMO thrown around a lot, but I'm still not entirely sure what they do. Can you shed some light on that? Sure. The PMO is essentially the central nervous system of the portfolio. They provide support guidance and oversight to the portfolio manager and the individual project teams.
So they're like the glue that holds everything together,
Hmm.
making sure that everyone is on the same page working towards the same goals.
That's a great way to put it. They help ensure that projects are aligned with the portfolio's strategic objectives, that resources are allocated effectively, and that risks are identified and mitigated. They're really the champions of good portfolio management practices throughout the organization.
This is reminding me of that old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And it sounds like the PMO is instrumental in helping organizations plan for success.
Absolutely. Portfolio management is all about planning, about anticipating challenges, about setting yourself up for success. But it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of monitoring, adjusting, and optimizing.
So even after we've launched our projects, we're not just like sitting back and waiting to see what happens. We need to be actively involved in making sure things are on track.
Exactly. We need to be constantly evaluating performance, identifying potential roadblocks, and making course corrections as needed. Think of it like sailing a ship. You set your course, but you're constantly adjusting your sails based on the wind, the currents, and any obstacles that might arise.
And that's where those performance metrics we talked about earlier come in handy, right? We need to be able to measure if we're actually making progress towards our goals. And if not, figure out why and make adjustments.
You nailed it. We need to be tracking things like budget, schedule, scope, and most importantly, the value being delivered by each project. Are we actually moving the needle on those strategic objectives that we defined at the beginning of this whole process?
Is at the end of the day, it's all about creating value for the organization, right? That's what makes a portfolio successful.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
No, dude.
And speaking of value, there's one more crucial aspect of portfolio management that we need to discuss, and that is risk. And that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive. So stay tuned for an exciting exploration of the world of portfolio risk management.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've been on quite a journey, exploring how to build a project portfolio that's not just a list of projects, but really a powerful engine for achieving your organization's strategic goals.
Yeah, and now we're going to tackle a topic that can be a bit intimidating even for experienced portfolio managers. We're talking about risk.
Yeah, because let's face it, every project comes with some level of risk. No matter how carefully we plan, there's always the possibility that things won't go exactly as expected. And when we're dealing with a whole portfolio of projects, those risks can get pretty complex.
That's right. But here's the thing. Risk isn't something to be feared. It's something to be understood and managed.
So we're not trying to like eliminate risk altogether,
Yeah.
because that's probably not even possible in the real world, is it?
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between risk and reward. And that starts with understanding your organization's risk appetite.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth revisiting. Can you remind us what risk appetite means in the context of portfolio management?
Sure, risk appetite is basically how much risk an organization is willing to take on in order to achieve its strategic objectives. Some organizations are more risk averse. They prefer to play it safe. Others are more comfortable with pushing the boundaries and taking on bigger challenges.
So like a startup might be willing to bet everything on a single innovative product, while a large established company might be more cautious and prefer incremental improvements.
That's a great example. And the standard for portfolio management really stresses that risk appetite. Should be based on a clear understanding of the organization's strategy, its culture, and the perspectives of its key stakeholders. It's not just a top-down decision. It needs to be a collaborative process to make sure everyone is on board.
Okay, so we figured out our organization's risk appetite. Now, how do we actually manage risk at the portfolio level? Is there like a framework or something that we can use?
Absolutely. And the standard for portfolio management provides a really helpful framework for developing a portfolio risk management plan. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Mhm.
It needs to be tailored to your specific organization and its unique set of risks.
So it's not just about checking boxes and filling out spreadsheets. We need to actually think critically about the potential risks and come up with strategies to address them.
Exactly. A good portfolio risk management framework will include things like a clear definition of risk and how it will be assessed and measured. It will outline processes for identifying potential risks, analyzing their potential impact, and prioritizing them based on their likelihood and severity.
So it's kind of like a detective's investigation.
Yes.
You're gathering clues, you're evaluating evidence, you're trying to figure out which risks are the most likely to trip you up.
I like that analogy. And once you've identified and analyzed your risks, the next step is to develop strategies for responding to them. And there are a few different approaches you can take.
Okay, so walk us through those approaches. What are our options when it comes to dealing with risk?
Well, one option is risk mitigation. This means taking steps to reduce the likelihood or impact of a risk. For example, if you're worried about a project going over budget, you might put in place stricter cost controls or explore ways to reduce the scope.
So it's about being proactive and putting safeguards in place to minimize the potential damage.
Exactly. Another approach is risk avoidance. This means completely avoiding activities that carry a certain risk. For example, if a new market entry is deemed too risky, you might decide not to pursue it at all.
Okay, so sometimes the best way to manage risk is to just simply walk away from it.
Sometimes, yes, but of course that's not always possible or desirable. A third option is risk transfer. This means transferring the risk to another party, such as through insurance or outsourcing. For example, you might purchase insurance to cover the cost of potential project delays.
Interesting. So it's like spreading the risk around instead of bearing the full weight of it yourself.
Exactly. And finally, there's risk acceptance. This means acknowledging a risk and choosing to do nothing about it, often because the cost of mitigating or avoiding the risk outweighs the potential impact.
So it's like a calculated gamble. We're saying we know this risk exists, but we're willing to roll the dice.
Precisely. Choosing the right risk response strategy depends on a number of factors, including the nature of the risk, the organization's risk appetite, and the cost-benefit analysis of each option. And a good portfolio risk management framework will provide guidance on making those decisions.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense. But it sounds like a pretty complex process. Is there anyone who can kind of help us navigate all of this?
Yes, remember the PMO we talked about earlier? They play a critical role in supporting portfolio risk management. They can provide guidance tools and templates to help project teams identify, analyze, and respond to risks. They can also help monitor and report on risks at the portfolio level, ensuring that risk management is an ongoing process, not just a one-time activity.
So the PMO is like our risk management superhero.
You could say that. They're there to help us make informed decisions about risk and ensure that we're taking the right steps to protect our portfolio and achieve our strategic objectives. And the standard for portfolio management highlights an interesting point here about risk perception. Uncertainty actually increases at higher levels.
Wait, really? I would thought it was the other way around. Shouldn't individual projects be more uncertain than like the whole portfolio?
It seems counterintuitive, but think about it this way. At the portfolio level, you're dealing with a much wider range of variables, many of which are outside of your control. You've got multiple projects, different teams, dependencies between projects, changing market conditions. All of these things add layers of complexity and uncertainty.
Okay, yeah, they're starting to see the logic there. So how do we deal with that increased uncertainty at the portfolio level?
By being even more diligent about our risk management. We need to be constantly scanning the horizon for potential threats and opportunities, and we need to be prepared to adjust our portfolio accordingly. It's not just about managing the risks we know about, it's about anticipating and responding to the risks we don't know about.
So it's a continuous process of adapting and evolving.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset. We need to move away from a reactive firefighting approach to risk management and towards a more proactive strategic approach.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to realize that risk management isn't just about checking boxes and avoiding problems. It's about making smart, informed decisions. That will ultimately lead to a more successful portfolio.
And a more successful organization overall. When we manage risk effectively, we're freeing up our resources and energy to focus on what really matters, achieving our strategic objectives and making a real impact.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've gone from the foundational ideas of modern portfolio theory to practical strategies for applying them to the real-world projects. We've tackled uncertainty, embraced diversification, learned how to balance those short-term wins with long-term innovation.
And we've seen how risk management isn't just about avoiding negative outcomes. It's about making informed decisions that position us for
But
success.
I think most importantly, we've learned that building a dream portfolio isn't just about crunching numbers and following a formula. It's about aligning projects with strategy, understanding risk, and empowering teams to do their best work.
So as you embark on your own portfolio management journey, remember the key takeaways from our deep dive. Embrace the challenge, be strategic, and never stop learning.
And remember, the most successful portfolios are those that are built on a foundation of clear vision, strong governance, and a relentless focus on creating value. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.